good afternoon, good evening, depending on what part of the world you are joining us from. If you're interested, please type whatever city you're joining us from or country. We would love to know. And just want to say before we get started, we recognize during this time there is a lot of fear and anxiety and stress surrounding the global pandemic. And we hope that this time that you spend with us will highlight some of the unity and success stories around COVID-19, things that we have been doing, things that we have done, and things that we plan to do to fight this global pandemic. So thank you for joining us. I also want to remind everybody to tweet about the event on our handle, which is TEXGHS, and our hashtag is TEXGHS. So I'm Sarah Gerwig. I'll be your moderator for the event. I was born and raised in Austin, Texas, and attended the University of Texas for undergraduate in Austin and for the UT School of Public Health and graduate school in Houston. I've worked in global health for over a decade in academic health science and as an entrepreneur in the world's largest Texas medical center. I'm now the CEO of Up Global and previously served as Director of Innovation with Baylor College of Medicine's Global Innovation Center and as the Associate Director of the Global Medical Innovation Program at Rice University's Department of Bioengineering. It looks like we have several attendees. We had over 330 registered last time I checked. Just to call out a few, we have representatives from WHO joining us, the Rockefeller Foundation, ABB Robotics, Austin Community College, the Global Health Security Network, Austin Chamber of Commerce, and many other academic, private, and startup partners. So welcome. We also want to thank our sponsor, Luminex. This event wouldn't be possible without the support of Luminex, whose mission is to empower labs and to obtain reliable, timely, and actionable answers, ultimately advancing health. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Jay Hartzell, who is the 30th president of the University of Texas. Hook 'em horns, welcome. President Hartzell holds the Lois and Richard Folger Dean's Leadership Chair, the Centennial Chair in Business Education Leadership, and the Trammell Crow Regents Professorship in Business. Prior to serving as president, Dr. Hartzell served as the 12th Dean of the McCombs School of Business at UT, one of the largest and most distinguished business schools in the country. And as Dean for over 4 years, he launched the Goff Real Estate Labs, elevated Canfield Business Honors Program, and opened Rolling Hall, home of UT's MBA program. He helped create many significant partnerships with colleges and schools around campus, including the Dell Medical School, the College of Fine Arts, Liberal Arts, Natural Sciences, and the Moody College of Communication. He also established the position of Associate Dean of Diversity and Inclusion at the McCombs School and McCombs Diversity and Inclusion Chair. President Hartzell, we look forward to having you lead the university during this difficult and unique time. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thanks for the opportunity to say hello and a few words about this really exciting initiative in this consortium. And you know, you think about there's just probably couldn't be a better time to bring together the kind of talented people and organizations that you all are bringing together today for the Texas Global Health Security Innovation Consortium. And I think a lot of what we do as a university is trying to bring together talented people and to solve really hard problems. And this effort is a great example of that and one that we're happy to be a part of. This is bringing together an incredible range of partners from community members to the government, to corporations, innovators, investors, and subject matter experts. And not only to get through this pandemic, but also to prepare for the next one. And we all know that the best solutions come from diverse teams that harness distinct strengths, different points of view, different sources of knowledge and expertise. And this is just an outstanding example of that kind of an effort. TEXGHS points to the future of what a great research university like UT can do. We can leverage the abilities of our world-class faculty to work with our partners in every sector to solve the biggest problems of our time. We clearly are all now talking and worrying and working through COVID-19, and it's certainly had an impact on UT Austin. And we've meanwhile been working hard to both understand and to fight it. We've had to make many adjustments. We've had new safety measures, the way that our classes are conducted. We've reduced the density in our campus. We've taken many of our classes online. We're learning how to conduct research in labs safely. So lots of efforts to make sure we can continue to deliver. Our missions in education, research, and healthcare, meanwhile, all have to carry on full steam. Now, the role of the University of the First Class is to serve our great state and our nation during this time of crisis in every possible way, and that's what we've been doing. A couple of examples that come to mind. Jason McClellan, whom we recruited away from Dartmouth, he and his team are mapping the spike protein of COVID, helping make vaccines and antiviral drugs more effective and possible. We've also been very lucky in some sense to have the presence now of the Dell Medical School, UHS, and UT Health Austin, who are all bringing together their expertise to serve our community through this difficult time. We're proud of the role of UT as a statewide and nationwide leader in innovation, and we're happy to bring that perspective and those efforts in the fight against COVID-19 and in future pandemics. That's why we exist as a university, to take on the really big problems facing society. It's critical that we take down barriers both within the university and among UT and other higher education institutions, private and public sector partners, so that we can reduce those barriers to work together and leverage all that we're best at. At UT, that's our knowledge and creation, discovery, research, and innovation across a wide variety of disciplines. That's why the Austin Technology Incubator, the Dell Medical School, our College of Pharmacy, and the College of Engineering are all founding partners of TEXGHS. We have a lot of capacity at UT to invent, to explore, to make an impact, but we can't do that without partners. Those partners can help us take ideas and discoveries to the market, can build strong coalitions, and help shape government policy and beyond. That's why this consortium is so important to us. We all within the UT community know our motto, what starts here changes the world, but we can only really live up to those words, especially with a problem as complex as a pandemic, by forming meaningful and lasting partnerships. We're all very pleased, and I'm personally very pleased that TEXGHS is formed, and I know that its work will make a big impact. We'll get through these hard times as a state and as a nation by working together. We're united and committed to that cause, and that's how we'll get ahead at the next big challenge or crisis, whatever it may be. So thank you all again for the chance to talk to you today. Thank you for your efforts, and I look forward to seeing the great work that will come out of this. Hook 'em horns.
Hook 'em horns. Thank you so much, Dr. Hartzell, for your service to the University of Texas, the nation as a whole, and just serving our current and future leaders of society to change the world, like we say. Next, I'd like to introduce Adriana Cruz. Adriana is the Executive Director of Economic Development and Tourism for the Office of the Texas Governor, Greg Abbott. As Executive Director, Cruz provides leadership to business and community development, economic development, finance, Texas Tourism, Texas Workforce Investment Council, Texas Music Office, and the Texas Film Commission. Cruz has more than 20 years of leadership experience in economic development, marketing, and international business. And in April 2020, she was appointed by Governor Abbott to the Strike Force to Open Texas, a team of nationally recognized private and public leaders to advise the governor on safely and strategically reopening the state of Texas. Adriana, we look forward to hearing more about the impact of COVID-19 on the state of Texas and the response from the governor's office. Thank you.
I'll unmute myself first. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah, for that introduction. I'm honored to be here with you all today at the virtual launch of the Texas Global Health Security Innovation Consortium, together with President Hartzell, Representative Howard, and other distinguished panelists and speakers we'll be hearing from. There's no doubt that this consortium will be a valuable resource for supporting the economic recovery of the state of Texas. As Sarah said, I was appointed by Governor Abbott 10 months ago as Executive Director of the Office of Economic Development and Tourism. I started work 4 months before the worst of COVID-19 hit. And this pandemic has undoubtedly affected our state, the nation, and the world. The governor's first priority during this crisis has been the health and safety of all Texas residents, which has also been a priority for our state and local leaders. The pandemic not only affected people's lives, but their livelihoods. Our state's small businesses faced enormous challenges as a result of COVID-19. Small business and entrepreneurs are the backbone of the Texas economy, and state and local resources are focused on helping them get through these difficult times. At the height of the pandemic, just to give you an idea of sort of the impact on the state economy, Texas lost 1.4 million jobs. 42% of those jobs were in the leisure and hospitality industry, which was severely impacted. Our second quarter GDP declined by 29%. In April, the governor announced the strike force to reopen Texas, and I'm honored to be named as a member of that strike force and to serve on his Strategic Advisory Council. And this was a group formed to advise the governor and a medical panel advising the governor on how to safely and strategically reopen the state's economy through a phased approach. And the governor's approach to reopening the economy, this phased with limited capacity openings in different sectors, was something that was appealing to CEOs from across the country, from the East Coast and the West Coast. And as a result, we've seen an increased level of interest in Texas and high prospect activity. And as a result of the reopening efforts, we are seeing some positive results. We've gained back more than 600,000 jobs, about half of those jobs in leisure and hospitality. Our unemployment rate has dropped from a high of 13% to 6.8% today. The state's workforce is back up to 14 million. And from June to July, our exports have increased by $7.6 billion. But most importantly, the things that make Texas a great place to live and work and travel, our business climate, our natural beauty, our diverse and talented workforce, and our wonderful higher education and research institutions, all of those things are still here. It's times like these that bring us together, and finding solutions to challenging problems is part of the Texas identity. This has never been truer than during the COVID-19 pandemic. We've seen countless Texas businesses in technology and manufacturing and other sectors stepping up to the plate to help solve the challenge that our state is facing. Some of them have pivoted operations and identified innovative new ways to continue operating during the crisis. And businesses around the state were able to help meet their community's needs and contribute valuable resources to our state, such as much needed PPE when Texas needed it most. Our office has played a role through our Business and Retention Expansion Program, which works to help foster growth and development in our targeted industry sectors such as healthcare and technology. Our team works with our existing Texas businesses on their growth, retention, and expansion plans. But the Texas Global Health Security Innovation Consortium is a great example of how collaboration between the university, public, and private sectors are positioning Texas for the future. This type of collaboration is critically important to spur not only the recovery of the Texas economy, but to protect our state and our nation from future pandemics. A good friend and mentor, Pike Powers, who was one of the founders of the Austin Tech scene and was recognized by Austin Technology Incubator this past August with the George Kosmetsky Lifetime Achievement Award, wrote a paper about this type of collaboration many years ago, about building the Austin Technology Cluster and the role of government and community collaboration in the human capital. In it, he details how the collaboration between the public sector, the private sector, and the university led to the establishment of the Austin tech scene that we know today and the Central Texas economy that we see. And that is a great blueprint for the future. Texas' already strong emphasis on public-private partnerships, which has only been amplified during these challenging times, will undoubtedly benefit us moving forward through the recovery process. Congratulations on your launch, and I look forward to working with you all on these efforts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adriana, for your words and for all of the work that you are doing with the governor's office. We appreciate the effort and toilsome effort that it takes to reopen Texas and to do it in a way that is safe for all of our patrons. We recognize you guys have probably had many sleepless nights, and we appreciate you guys just taking care of Texas and trying to keep us safe. Thank you. And with that, I would like to transition to our keynote speaker today, Dr. Peter Hotez, who many of you have probably seen or heard on programs such as BBC, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, just to name a few. Dr. Hotez is an internationally recognized physician scientist in neglected tropical diseases and vaccine development. He is the Dean of the National School of Tropical Medicine and Professor of Pediatrics in Molecular Virology and Microbiology at Baylor College of Medicine, where he is also the Director of the Texas Children's Center for Vaccine Development and Texas Children's Hospital Endowed Chair of Tropical Pediatrics. He's also a university professor at Baylor University, adjunct professor at the University of Texas School of Public Health, senior fellow of the Snowcroft Institute of International Affairs at Texas A&M University, and fellow in disease and poverty at the James A. Baker Institute for Public Policy at Rice University. So runs the entire gamut, not a Longhorn, not an Aggie, just unity. Dr. Hotez is a highly acclaimed scientist, researcher, advocate, and author, and we are grateful to have you as our keynote speaker today, Dr. Hotez. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. It's an honor to be here, and love the interruption with real student-teacher interactions there. It's life in COVID. It's a tough time for everybody, and I appreciate you taking the time to call in and really trying to figure out how to address a truly devastating global issue with COVID-19. And the way I want to start actually is by trying to make the case that what we're seeing with COVID-19 is not a total outlier, but actually represents a capstone of a culminating event of what's been going on in the last few years. If I had more time, I'd go into it, but we've made enormous progress from work at the World Health Organization, the WHO, and UNICEF, and the Gavi Alliance, and vaccinating the world's children. And I have a new book coming out with the title Preventing the Next Pandemic, Vaccine Diplomacy in the Time of Anti-Science, that basically makes the case that we've actually seen an erosion or a slowing, a halting, even a reversal of our public health gains over the last 5 years. And it's happening for reasons that many of us who've been getting trained in biomedical sciences don't ordinarily think about. It seems to be happening in areas where you're seeing this confluence of 21st century forces, including political instability, climate change, shifting poverty, urbanization, deforestation, and rising anti-science sentiments. And we're identifying new hotspots across the world where we're not making nearly as much progress as we had been, even before COVID-19. And I believe it's a relatively recent phenomena over the last 5 years, even to the point where we could even start reversing some of the original Millennium Development Goals and now Sustainable Development Goals. And we're trying to really collect the evidence base for this. This is a new approach that we've taken with a group at Texas A&M University, where we've seen this rise in hotspot areas where large numbers of kids aren't getting vaccinated. And this is mostly focused on the return of measles here, but we're also looking at it now for other vaccine preventable diseases and neglected tropical diseases. And one of the other observations that we've made beyond these hotspot areas is a huge amount of poverty-related neglected diseases is now occurring among the in wealthy countries in the group of 20 nations. And particularly the poor living among the wealthy is accounting for a lot of these illnesses. And it's a concept that's not caught on very much yet. I wrote a 2016 book in 2016 about this called Blue Marble Health. And it basically, the premise is when you use WHO data or Institute for Health Metrics data, where all the poverty-related diseases are, and it includes leprosy and leishmaniasis, and you name it, Chagas disease, tuberculosis, dengue. Overwhelmingly, they're in G20 nations, the group of the 20 largest economies. And you might say, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. These are poverty-related diseases. But it's the poor living among the wealthy that now account for a lion's share of these illnesses. So the whole nature of global health has been shifting. Rather than looking at it only as wealthy countries versus poor countries, or developed versus developing countries, it's the poor living among the wealthy accounting for this. And COVID-19 is very much going by that same playbook. We're now up to 30 million cases and 1 million deaths. And overwhelmingly, it's the G20 nations that account for these illnesses. But again, it's the poor living among the wealthy. We're seeing this here in Texas, particularly how it's been striking the Hispanic community. I testified last week at the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, really pointing out how we've seen historic decimation of the Hispanic communities across Texas and the southern United States. And I've just done an instant book update of this, which you can download for free from Johns Hopkins Project Muse. And it's called Poverty and the Impact of COVID-19, the Blue Marble Health Approach, and this concept of the poor living among the wealthy. And what we're focused on in our labs is developing COVID-19 vaccines. And as a way to take this on in a big way beyond the masks and contact tracing and social distancing, which are so important. And one of the points I like to make is that actually developing a COVID-19 vaccine is not as daunting as you might think. It's actually an old school problem in virology designed to make an immune response against the spike protein of the virus. And by doing that, it prevents the binding of the virus to our host tissues through the angiotensin converting enzyme receptor. And that's almost all the vaccines that we're developing are work by, and it's a matter of which technology is the best. So for an instance, the other approach to that is to actually give the antibodies themselves, and that's what was given to President Trump on Friday before he went into Walter Reed, and that was through monoclonal antibody therapy. And that may have actually made a huge difference in his progress, and I think it was responsible for his rapid recovery, because we've learned about how important virus neutralizing antibodies are. And all of the vaccines that we have more or less work by the same principle. This is a slide that Anthony Fauci showed over the summer at the National Academies, showing that they're all different approaches, different technologies for doing this. There's a nanoparticle approach, which is what Novavax is doing. What we're doing at Baylor is a recombinant protein vaccine approach. There's live attenuated vaccines, adenovirus-based vaccines, mRNA and DNA vaccines, but they're all focused on inducing an immune response to the spike protein of the virus. And this is kind of the TPP, means target product profile, of what we're expecting. What we want out of a vaccine is, first of all, to prevent you from getting sick and going to the hospital, reducing severity of illness. And that may be all some of the early vaccines actually do. Ideally, though, we'd like them to also prevent you from getting infection. And you might say, well, isn't that the same thing? Well, the answer is no. So for instance, in an influenza, in a year where there's not a good match between the influenza vaccine and the virus, what can happen is the vaccine can reduce the likelihood you get sick and go to the hospital, but you could still get the flu. And that may happen with some of the early COVID-19 vaccines, but in time, improved vaccines will come along so they actually block infection. And then the hope, if enough people get the vaccine, it'll actually interrupt transmission with sufficient coverage. So what we have to think about with all the vaccines rolling out, is going to be an evolving process. The first vaccines that come along may or may not be our best vaccines, but that's okay. I still think it's important you get those vaccines. I'll certainly try to get them for myself and my family, to get virus neutralizing antibody in your system. And then later, if better vaccines come along, you could get potentially boosted with those. Now, what we're seeing here for Operation Warp Speed, which is a public-private partnership between the federal government and the pharma companies, this is the name of our US program, is we're seeing two big waves of vaccines coming along. One, in this first wave, these are the vaccines that are now in phase 3 clinical trials in the US. There's 2 mRNA vaccines from Moderna and Pfizer, and then an adenovirus vaccine from AstraZeneca, Oxford. And then later on, we're going to see additional vaccines coming along. And the warp speed part is meant primarily not so much to shortchange the clinical trials, but to do all of the things around it to make this happen as fast as possible, which would include having factories making these vaccines now, what we say is at risk, meaning we're going to make them now whether or not we know they actually work. And the idea then is, and also combining some of the clinical trials, consolidating some of the phase 1 and phase 2 trials. So the point is, safety is not really being compromised, neither is determining whether or not the vaccines actually work. It's everything around it. And there are a lot of advantages of that. There's of the Operation Warp Speed program. It's an accelerated timetable. There's a diverse array of new technologies, very high in the innovation factor, because some of these vaccines use technologies that have never before been licensed, like the mRNA vaccine or the adenovirus vaccine. And by using all these different technologies, we're getting what's called multiple shots on goal, which will increase the likelihood at least one of them will be protecting. And then we're this manufacturing at risk to accelerate the timelines. Having said that, there are some potential disadvantages of the program. Again, because they're never licensed, the technologies have never been licensed. There's a lot we don't know about their long-term efficacy and also potentially safety, but hopefully we'll get a real sense of that with these phase 3 trials. So some of us have argued maybe Operation Warp Speed has gone a little too overboard with the innovation, and we need to balance it out a bit more with some of the old school vaccines, such as the inactivated virus vaccines or a recombinant protein vaccine through fermentation, which is what we're doing. And also some of these vaccines may be quite expensive because they are new technologies. Some of them require frozen storage at -94 degrees Fahrenheit. That's true of the Pfizer vaccine. So what it means is you're not going to get the Pfizer vaccine at HEB and Kroger and CVS and Walgreens. You're going to have a specialty system for doing that. My only real criticism, though, are these two bottom ones here. One, there has not been a communication plan coming out of Operation Warp Speed. The thought being they're going to leave that to the companies to do the communication, and that has not gone well. I think two of the companies are not traditional vaccine companies, AstraZeneca, Oxford, and Moderna, and the CEOs have fumbled a lot in terms of their messaging and their press release. And this is undermining public confidence in the program. And I think we're going to have to fix that. We're going to have to put in place a proper communication strategy and plan out of Operation Warp Speed. The other issue in terms of global health is the US very much is pursuing a go it alone strategy, meaning they've pulled out of the World Health Organization and that COVAX facility for sharing vaccines internationally. So what you're seeing now is this new phenomenon that some call Vaccionationalism, where now we have the Russian vaccine, the Chinese vaccine, the British vaccine, the American vaccine. You know, we've never spoken about vaccines like that before. It's always been about international cooperation to develop and distribute new vaccines. And I'm quite worried about what we're seeing right now. So for instance, because the US has pulled out, the UK government is just made a commitment. Boris Johnson gave a speech to the UN General Assembly last Saturday saying he would commit 571 million pounds to the COVAX facility. That's great, but without any US leadership, I think it is having a detrimental effect. So for instance, in some of the Latin American countries that we work with, they say that they'll only be guaranteed vaccine for 20% of their population, which means they don't have anything for the other 80%. So now they're pursuing one-off deals with the Russians and the Chinese. And it's almost like this Cold War style of influence that I'm really worried about. I'm worried about collapsing governance around vaccines, and certainly the Gavi Alliance, CEPI, and other organizations are trying to fix this. But right now things are in a very precarious state. And this is where we need to move towards what I call vaccine diplomacy, which is international cooperation to develop vaccines. And it's a concept that really began with Albert Sabin, who developed the oral polio vaccine. Not many people realize it, but the way that happened was Sabin in the 1950s brought his polio strains to the USSR, to the Soviet Union. And that's where those vaccines were actually made. Strains were actually made into a vaccine tested on 10 million Soviet school children, and that helped lead to the licensure of the vaccine. So At the height of the Cold War, after the Sputnik launch, the two nations put aside their ideologies to cooperate to make a life-saving vaccine. And they cooperated again jointly with WHO to develop and disseminate the smallpox vaccine. The Soviets figured out how to freeze dry the vaccine, which had allowed you to bring it into remote rural areas in places like Ethiopia. And again, it was that US-USSR collaboration that was so instrumental in eradicating smallpox. And we've lost that now, and we have to figure out a way to get it back. And that's was my role as US Science Envoy in the Obama administration, to look at how we could foster cooperation between the US and some of the Muslim majority countries in the Middle East and North Africa. But we need a lot more of this, and we're going in the wrong direction right now. So we have this terrible problem, and that is, tough as things are in the US, it's even worse here. I'm showing you some pictures of the big mega cities and the urban slum areas of the mega cities of Latin America, India, and Africa. And we're seeing this virus in Guayaquil in Ecuador, causing terrible devastation, or in Belém and Fortaleza and Manaus in Brazil, and I'm worried about Lagos and Kinshasa and big Indian mega cities of Delhi. I mean, how do you do social distancing when you live under these circumstances? You can't. So how are we going to ensure vaccines are made available? So what we're doing is we develop low-cost vaccines at our Texas Children's Center for Vaccine Development. That's part of our School of Tropical Medicine at Baylor College of Medicine. And we have a collaboration with PATH, which used to stand for the Program for Appropriate Technology in Health. Now they just call it PATH. It's a nonprofit product development partnership based in Seattle that historically has done a lot of work with the Gates Foundation to develop the meningococcal vaccine for Africa, the malaria vaccine for Africa. Now we're partnering with them in our program. And at our Texas Children's Center for Vaccine Development, which is co-headed by myself and my science partner for the last 20 years, Mary Elena Bottazzi, we've been working to develop a new model for how you can develop low-cost global health vaccines, and especially for areas of extreme poverty. So we have several vaccines for parasitic worm infections in clinical trials, and the new Chagas vaccine that we're accelerating in Mexico. And then about 10 years ago, we started working with the New York Blood Center, where Lan Yingdu and Shibu Jiang had come up with an idea for coronavirus vaccines. And the problem they faced was, at that time, nobody cared about coronavirus vaccines. So they were orphaned, very much like our parasitic disease vaccine. So we began working with them. And what they had found was, when you look at by now everyone has seen a cartoon of the coronavirus and recognizes the trimer of the spike protein. What they had found, if they just focus on the receptor binding domain, they can get a vaccine that gives high levels of virus neutralizing antibody and protection without any of the side effects and the immune enhancement. And we started developing coronavirus vaccines for SARS-1 and SARS-2. And so when COVID-19 hit and we saw the sequence being put up by the Chinese on bioRxiv, we said, you know, our vaccines look pretty similar. Maybe we could repurpose them as a heterologous vaccine against COVID-19, since they're already manufactured. And nobody really was very confident of that idea, but our team moved very quickly to make the receptor binding domain for the SARS-2 virus. And now we're scaling up, producing 1 billion doses of the vaccine, which I'll tell you about in a minute. And the nice thing about it is we're doing this in this yeast system called Pichia Pastoris, these little green blobs here, which are the scanning EM with faux color imaging of these budding yeast. Now you might say, well, why do I care if it's Pichia Pastoris? Well, the reason it's interesting is that yeast and related yeast species are used to make the recombinant hepatitis B vaccine locally in Bangladesh and Brazil and Cuba and India and Indonesia. The point is, it's actually produced in low and middle income countries. So this is a great way to start doing technology transfer, producing our COVID-19 vaccine. And now we've signed an agreement between Baylor and this company here, Biological E, which is one of the big vaccine producers in India. And they're now scaling up to produce 1.2 billion doses of our vaccine. And this is very exciting for us. One, because none of us have ever made 1 billion of anything before, and having to make 1.2 billion doses is really something. But it's, as you can imagine, the complexities there, and this is why our life is so intense, getting up at 5 in the morning on calls with India and other partners. So this is moving forward, and we're hoping that it can help solve this problem of vaccine nationalism, which is so destructive. The other thing that I'm worried about, and then we can take some time for questions, is this other almost equally concerning threat that we're now starting to see many Americans losing confidence in our vaccine system. And there's been now several surveys from Reuters and Associated Press and others finding that up to half of Americans will refuse COVID-19 vaccines, even if they're made available. And a lot of that is part of the mismessaging or the absence of messaging coming out of Operation Warp Speed, because what's happened is by leaving it to the pharma companies, they've really created a vacuum, and there's a very aggressive anti-vaccine lobby in this country. And the headquarters of it is really Austin, Texas. And the anti-vaccine lobby, what they claim is that vaccines are rushed, they're not adequately tested for safety. There's this conspiratorial relationship between the pharma companies and the US government, and they tout this fake concept that they call health freedom, and that government can't tell us what to do. So between all of this, they've created a lot of damage, and we're trying to find ways to counteract this. So under this banner of health freedom now, what we're seeing is protests not only against vaccines, but now they've expanded from being an anti-vaccine movement to a full-fledged anti-science movement, campaigning against social distancing and contact tracing and masks. And it's done a lot of damage in terms of this second peak of infection that began this summer across the southern states, where more than 60,000 people died. And part of that is I attribute to the anti-vaccine activities. And this is what the situation, for instance, we face in Texas now. We're up to 70,000 kids denied access to their vaccine. So we don't know anything about the homeschool kids. So certainly there's a lot more, and a lot of it is centered in the Austin area. And I get involved in this a lot because I tend to be targeted by the anti-vaccine lobby, because I'm a vaccine scientist and a pediatrician, but also the parent of 4 adult kids, including Rachel, who has autism and intellectual disabilities. And a few years ago, I wrote a book called Vaccines Did Not Cause Rachel's Autism, that debunks the fake links between MMR vaccine and autism, or thimerosal, or all the other crazy stuff they allege, spacing vaccines too close together, alum and vaccines, and also go into detail about what autism is and how it starts in early fetal brain development. And so this is a battle that I've been fighting since we came to Texas a decade ago. And now one of the lead anti-vaccine activists, Robert F. Kennedy, has publicly named me the OG villain, the original gangster villain, because I'm defending vaccines. So you're hearing a talk today by the OG villain, which is very interesting. And this has really now become a globalized movement. So we're starting to see the Russians now filling up our social media with fake messages about vaccines through bots and trolls. And we have leaders of the anti-vaccine movement like RFK Jr. now going into Germany. He spoke at a big rally last month that the CBS News reports was sponsored by QAnon and even the German neo-Nazi party. So we're starting to see this globalization of anti-science that really began in Texas, and it's taking this very ominous turn that gives me a lot of concern, and it's going to be a huge threat to global health. So I'll stop there. So this is the new book that'll come out next year called Preventing the Next Pandemic, Vaccine Diplomacy in a Time of Anti-Science. And it basically makes the case that we are in this epic struggle of science versus anti-science, of vaccines and all the excitement that vaccines can bring in terms of protecting public health, but also the rise of these 21st century forces, including shifting poverty, blue marble health, and climate change and war, and political collapse, urbanization, and this very aggressive anti-science movement. So, Sarah, let me stop there, and that way we can, leave a fair bit of time for questions, kind of giving sort of this broad overview of things. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Hotez, for speaking. We really appreciate you taking the time, and we know that you have another interview, but are grateful that you have a few minutes to answer some questions. So I'll ask one as others are starting to post. Please post in the Q&A portion, and I'll read those to you, Dr. Hotez. But generally speaking, are you hopeful about the future, Dr. Hotez?
Well, as scientists are generally always hopeful. So I think, what does Tony Fauci always say? Cautiously optimistic. So I guess I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm hopeful for a number of things. One, I think we will have several COVID-19 vaccines available by this time next year. And by this time next year, a significant percentage of the American population will be vaccinated. And although I'm a little more worried about what happens in some of the world's low and middle income countries, so I think our lives will be better next year. We'll not be entirely back to normal. We'll still have to have masks and do contact tracing. I am very concerned about this rising anti-science movement, in part because nobody wants to take it on. And it's, and it's interesting because it's taken on this kind of link to far right-wing extremist groups like Nazi parties and QAnon. That kind of makes it radioactive for organizations to touch it. So governments tend not to want to do anything about it because it's seen as a political activity. And now in the international health organizations, somewhat, the WHO did list vaccine hesitancy as a major threat to global health last year with the return of measles. And a lot of nonprofits won't touch it because they're 501c3 organizations, and by their charter, they cannot engage in political activity. So this veneer of far right-wing extremism the irony is it actually insulates the anti-vaccine movement, anti-science movement from anyone directly taking it on, just leaving it to a handful of scientists like myself.
Thank you for sharing, Dr. Hotez. I think you answered Doug Norton's question. I'm going to ask Adam Lippmans, can you talk a little bit about antibody-based therapies versus vaccine therapies?
Yeah, so the idea behind the vaccines is we stimulate the body to produce virus neutralizing antibody. And the problem is if it takes 2 doses a month apart, and then a few weeks after that, you're looking at, minimum 6 to 7 weeks from the time you start vaccinating to the time you have significant neutralizing antibodies in your system. The question is, what happens if you get exposed to COVID-19 before that time? And the idea behind some of the monoclonal antibody cocktails, as well as convalescent plasma, is that you give it exogenously now as soon as you start getting sick. The problem with convalescent plasma is there's variability in the concentration of antibody and the titer of antibody. You could control it much better through monoclonal antibody preparations like being produced at Regeneron or AbCellera with Lilly. And I'm very excited about those as drugs, provided we can keep the costs down and make it widely available. And so the president, when he started getting sick, was not enrolled in a clinical trial. Certainly these are in clinical trials, but was allowed to obtain it through the FDA's expanded access program through compassionate use. And he made a huge recovery. Now the question is, at least so far, the question is, was he going to recover anyway? Did it happen in spite of getting the monoclonal antibodies or because of it? We'll never know the answer. But I personally think it made a difference. And there's been a lot of questions about should the president have been enrolled in a randomized clinical trial to get it. And, I listen to people like Art Kaplan, who says that presidential medicine is unique and always has been. And I don't know that the American people would have had an appetite for enrolling the president in a randomized clinical trial. But if you go onto my social media feed, on my Twitter, you'll see there's a pretty vigorous discussion going on with people feeling very passionate one way or the other.
Great. Thanks for sharing that, Dr. Hotez. Scott Johnson is asking a little bit about how to adequately prepare transport of the vaccines to remote locations. Rural areas, agricultural, agrarian societies. Is there any discussion about vaccines using cold chain supplies, and how would that work?
Well, we have a lot of experience in cold chain transport of vaccines. I mean, the Gavi Alliance, WHO, and UNICEF have been dealing with this for decades. So they have, an incredibly efficient system in place, which is great. But there are going to be complexities. For instance, as I say, the Pfizer vaccine has to be sort of minus 94 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a deep, deep freeze. That's going to be problematic, I think, even if it's a good vaccine, creating that system to transport the vaccine. The other thing that's happened is the Russians have with their Gamaleya vaccine, and there's some weaknesses to it, but one of the things they are good at is freeze drying technology. They've now figured out how to freeze dry that vaccine, so that could be an advantage as well. But this is going to be a big issue.
Can you talk to us a little bit about timeline of herd immunity and kind of discussing what that looks like for our society to go back to some semblance of normal?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that's talked about with herd immunity, and what's happened is, there's been some misinformation coming out of the White House trying to make claims that herd immunity can occur as low as 22%. You heard about the exchange between Senator Rand Paul and Tony Fauci about that. Right now, there's not been a lot of evidence for herd immunity from the virus. The way it's usually calculated is it's a simple equation, 1 minus 1 over the reproductive number of the virus, and the reproductive number of the virus is between 2 or 3, and that's how you get to 60 to 70% calculated herd immunity. And that seems to be maybe happening in Manaus in Brazil. There's a paper that came out a week or so ago showing they've reached that now and maybe transmission's going down. So 66% herd immunity, though, is a lot of people to get infected and a lot of deaths. And people seem to be very passionate about wanting to make statements that herd immunity could be reached at far lower levels, but we haven't really seen much evidence for that. Then the question is, can we do it through a vaccine? Well, we've done some modeling to say that you can potentially interrupt transmission and achieve herd immunity if you've got a very effective vaccine that stops infection and vaccinate way more than half the population. The problem is we don't know about the performance of these vaccines yet, how good they're going to be, as I say, at stopping infection, versus reducing severity of illness. So we'll learn a lot more in the next year, but we're still a long way off before we can have some meaningful predictions about herd immunity.
Thank you so much for everything, Dr. Hotez. Are there any parting comments you'd like to share with us before you have to jump onto your other interview?
No, I would just say thank you for having me, and these kinds of events are really important because I do think there is a vacuum in science communication right now, and the only way, and it's being filled up by anti-vaccine groups and anti-science groups. So the best way to combat the disinformation and the misinformation is to do the kinds of things like you've organized today. So thank you so much, and congratulations for doing that.
Thank you, Dr. Hotez. We really appreciate you taking the time to break things down for us, to this group of entrepreneurs, innovators, scientists, companies, foundations. We really appreciate all of your effort and the work that you're doing, and we'll see you soon on television for sure. So we appreciate
it. I have to go on MSNBC now, but thank you so much.
Good luck. Thanks, Dr. Hotez.
Bye.
Bye. So I'm now going to transition to Dr. Lisa McDonald. Like each of our speakers today, Dr. McDonald wears many hats. She's the Director of Healthcare Incubation at Austin Technology Incubator, the startup incubator for the University of Texas at Austin, and she directs ATI's life science and healthcare portfolios, where she works with early stage biotech, healthcare service, IT, and medical device companies to develop their business strategies and prepare companies to seek investment. Lisa is working on private-public partnerships every day, and we are thankful for that work, as Dr. Hotez and many, Adriana, have mentioned, is so pivotal for our work in Texas and internationally. In 2010, Dr. McDonald co-founded Endura Ventures, a global health strategic consultancy focused on delivering high-impact programs internationally and through those public-private partnerships. One of the programs, Pandemic Tech Virtual Incubator, spun out as a standalone company in 2019 and partners with organizations worldwide to identify and support the innovations of hot zone scientists, developing technologies to stem the spread of pandemic infectious disease from the front lines, scientists just like Dr. Hotez. So Dr. McDonald, can you share with us a little bit more about TEXGHS and your work?
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that introduction. I appreciate everyone's attendance today. I very much appreciate the attendance of the panelists. I wanted to spend a few minutes talking to you about our work at the Texas Global Health Security Innovation Consortium, where we've been, and really what our plans for the future are. So I'll share my screen. So today we've heard from President Hartzell saying that partnerships are key to solving big problems. We've heard from Adriana Cruz saying, recalling the seminal work of people like Pike Powers and George Kosmetsky, who drove big solutions to big problems through partnerships across the academia, business, and government. We've heard from Peter Hotez talking to us about the need to combat anti-science. I know that Luis Ochoa is probably on the call, who refers to it as a pandemic of ignorance. I recall one of my favorite books growing up, right when I was, became interested in science, was by Carl Sagan. It's called Demon Haunted World, Science as a Candle in the Dark. What we're doing with Texas Global Health Security Innovation Consortium is really championing science and partnerships to be able to support the work of innovators that are developing technologies to address COVID-19, but also building resiliency into our communities to prevent something like this from ever happening again. So I'd like to start off by thanking our sponsor, Luminex, who's made this event possible. For those of you who are not familiar, we define global health security as the state of freedom from the scourge of infectious disease, irrespective of origin and source. It's achieved through policies, programs, and activities taken to prevent, detect, react to, and recover from biological threats. It's critically important, and Peter Hotez also brought this to our attention. These threats know no borders, and they have global consequences requiring more effective collective action. So what we've sought to do with TEXGHS is bring together that collective action across the state of Texas and follow the guidance given by our friends at the WHO, who said that we need local solutions that can scale globally to address infectious disease threats in our places of origin. We've chosen to do this through our vision of achieving health security through readiness, response, recovery, and resiliency. And our mission at TEXGHS is to spearhead the creation and success of a health security innovation ecosystem in Texas, where equitable, inclusive solutions launch locally and grow globally. Well, how have we done this? We began 7 months ago at this point, having conversations across our ecosystem, really starting at the Austin Technology Incubator, about how best do we support what we perceived to be an uptick in innovators working to address COVID-19. So we began with the hypothesis that there were more and more people that were working on technologies or pivoting their existing technologies towards COVID. We began to send out a series of surveys to identify those innovators, and we asked them to tell us what you're working on and indicate 3 or 4 areas of assistance that would help you get your product into the market. So at this point, we have 90 entries in a resource database, and we're getting new entries all the time. People literally coming out of the woodwork to pivot their companies and to use their intelligence and creativity to address the COVID-19 pandemic. We refer to those people as our innovators, and we set about, once we had collected that mass of information about what people were working on, we looked deeper into what sort of assistance did they need. And across the board, there were 3 main areas of assistance that people indicated would be helpful to them. That was funding assistance, partnerships, and subject matter expertise. So we reached across the state of Texas to start bringing on ecosystem partners that could meet those needs for companies. And those ecosystem partners have come from a variety of different areas, certainly our academia, the private sector, our government agencies, and individuals, serial entrepreneurs, technologists, scientists, everyone who wanted to volunteer their time to make sure that we could support the work of innovators that were looking to combat COVID. And what we found is that many of those innovations are specific to COVID, but more and more we're seeing innovations that build a resiliency into our communities. And we're hoping that those technologies will prevent the risk, or at least mitigate the risk of future pandemics as well. So there are three main parts to our ecosystem. We're finding over time that even amongst ecosystem partners who would be providing resources to innovators, there are ways that we can assist them. We're finding collaboration amongst partners in the TEXGHS ecosystem, and we're finding success on behalf of our innovators. And we're also finding more and more that sponsors want to support this type of work. The TEXGHS ecosystem is large and growing. There are many different types of companies. We have venture capital companies that are looking for investments. We have our community-based organizations like the Austin Chamber. We have wet lab facilities like Austin Community College's Bioscience Incubator, the Temple Health and Bioscience District. We have several different partners from within the University of Texas at Austin, but also across UT system. Our friends at Texas A&M and the Hart Research Institute for Gulf of Mexico Studies. People from private industry like David Sprague at Industrial Genetics. Many of our angel networks and new ventures like Texas Air Industries that came about because of the collaboration between ecosystem partners within TEXGHS to work to develop a piece of technology that allows for ozone disinfection of commercial spaces. So there's plenty going on, and we're always looking to add more ecosystem partners, add more innovators, because this is truly a mass effect. The more people that are participating in this innovation ecosystem, the better we'll be able to demonstrate measurable outputs of the innovation ecosystem. We've divided our technologies of interest into 5 different areas, but what we found is that there are probably many more that maybe don't fit specifically into one of these areas, but would benefit the resiliency in our community and our response to COVID-19. We've got vaccination technologies like Vaccine Systems that's developing a piece of technology to facilitate mass vaccination campaigns. We have therapeutic technologies, diagnostics, prevention technologies like epistemics that uses agent-based modeling to allow school administrators and others to see a representation of what their decision-making will have in terms of the burden of disease within their respective populations. And then we have a focus on community and making sure that each of our different activities in these areas is equitable and accessible to everyone, not just people that, that work in our circles, not just people that are participating as ecosystem partners. We want to make sure that we understand where the needs and the perceptions of the community are, and that we open a bilateral conversation across our community so we can be sure that innovations that are supported by TEXGHS affect everyone in the way that they expect to be affected and benefited from those innovations. So how can you get involved? There's several different ways. I made reference to them before. It is very important, if you have an innovation in the health security space, let us know about it. Let us know about the help that you need. If you have resources or thoughts or anything at your disposal that you believe would be of help to innovators or people that are trying to come up with solutions to global health security problems, let us know. Join us as an ecosystem partner. And if you want to support monetarily or through in-kind donations to this effort, let us know and be a sponsor. I want to take a second because I've really been overwhelmed by the amount of volunteer effort, the creativity, the true entrepreneurial spirit by all of those that are participating on our founding team. And this is just a small subset. I also want to recognize those who maybe aren't mentioned here specifically, but have attended our meetings, have given thoughts or ideas or feedback to our strategic plan, to our partnership model. There are so many people that are coming together and working on a daily basis to try and get solutions out locally so we can grow them past, grow them outside of the state of Texas globally. So really what we're trying to do is develop a model, a template for how people can successfully collaborate to solve big problems. That's the spirit of the University of Texas at Austin. It's the spirit of TEXGHS, and I think it's the spirit of Texas as well. Thanks so much to everyone for attending. Please take the time to go by our website. You can get involved there. You can learn more about some of our early successes, and we'd love to have you on board to contribute to the team.
Thank you so much for sharing, Dr. McDonald. We really appreciate your comments and feedback, sharing more about TEXGHS, and call everyone who is interested to get involved and visit our website to learn more. So far today, we've heard from academia, researchers, innovators, and now we're going to talk about our communities. I'd like to introduce Dr. Kalhoff, our panel moderator. She is going to share about communities in the effect of COVID-19. Dr. Kalhoff leads Workspaces at Texas Health CoLab, a co-working space for value-focused health innovation startups at Dell Medical School. where she guides and advises numerous healthcare startups on their journey to commercialization. As part of the Texas Health Collab, she's also developed programs and hubs that engage and connect researchers, innovators, entrepreneurs, and corporate partners to build supportive and collaborative health innovation ecosystems. As a representative of the Dell Medical School, she's also founding member of TEXGHS. Dr. Kalhag.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Sarah. It is certainly a pleasure to be participating in the launch of TEXGHS and to see all the work that so many people have done culminating in today's event and going forward. I'm also very delighted to be welcoming our panelists today. We have Texas House Member Representative Donna Howard joining us today, as well as Dr. Mordred Chibi, Technical Officer with the World Health Organization, and Dr. Clay Johnston, the Dean from Dell Medical School at UT Austin. Welcome to all panelists, and thank you so much for joining us today.
You bet.
I would like to start off with brief introductions and insights in the communities that you are working with, and certainly as it pertains to COVID. Really looking forward to hearing, because I think we have a really widespread of activity and communities getting involved. Representative Howard, do you want to get us started?
Sure. I guess I would start off by just kind of warning you that I'm with the government and I'm here to help, which of course is always kind of a scary set of words to hear. You know, we've obviously had some great partnerships here. I'm very excited about TEXGHS. I think this is the way we need to be moving forward. But, you know, here in working in state government, we have multiple concerns about how this is impacting the way we're operating. It's affecting health, obviously. It's affecting commerce. It's affecting education. We're recognizing disproportionate impacts on Texans. But one of the biggest challenges I think that we have faced is the politicization of this effort, and the fact that we haven't had a national strategy. I know that there have been efforts in the state. I don't want to get too political here, but I don't believe we've really had an effective state strategy either. And there's been a lot of inconsistency among different jurisdictions because of that, which has resulted in an inability of Texans to know what the expected behaviors are sometimes. And we've had the governor attempt to reopen our economy at times with perhaps not all of the metrics in place that we needed, certainly without the testing and contact tracing in place to monitor this, and then had to shut some things back down. We're at a point now where we're looking at reopening some more things. We've obviously started school. The legislature is going to be in session come January. We don't know what that's going to look like. So really, in terms of my approach to this as a state government person in policy making, a lot of unknowns, a lot of missteps in terms of faulty data, constantly restructuring how we're looking at the data so that we don't have consistency and we don't have credibility oftentimes in how we're going to move forward. That's why this is so very important to us. Hopefully we will use this to make informed policy decisions and be good partners with academia and with entrepreneurs and with tech and with all those folks that are coming together, innovators that are coming together, because that's where a lot of the solutions have come from, obviously, already, to help us address things. I mean, I can go back to when we first started with this and the lack of PPE that we had. It was the innovation community in Austin, Texas, and throughout the state that responded to that and repurposed and pivoted to create the things that we needed. So I'll leave it at that. There's more things I'd like to talk about, but I'd love to give the other panelists a chance to say something too.
Very good. Thank you, Don. Thank you, Representative Howard. Dr. Johnston, obviously you're also embedded in Texas. So I suspect many of the things Representative Howard touched on are affecting your work and Austin as well.
Yeah, definitely. So, certainly there are the local things that we have to deal with, in the medical school and and our local hospital too, gearing it up to be able to respond appropriately to the epidemic, keeping up with all the evidence, all of that stuff. And then beyond that, though, the school has a link to the community in Austin. For those who aren't aware, that we're really tied to this community, and we take on that. Our goal is to make Austin a model healthy city, and so that's encouraged us to sort of dive in and figure out how to create those partnerships and enable the city to have as robust a response as it can. And that's been really hard. I mean, it's been easy in some ways because we have wonderful potential partners out there, but the reality is that our efforts have been under supported. The public health apparatus in the U.S., not just in Texas but all over, has been neglected for decades, and so it wasn't ready. No one could be for something this big. But because we funnel so many activities and so many responsibilities in through the public health entities, that's gummed things up in a way that has been frustrating. I completely agree with Representative Howard that it's the innovations that are really going to make a difference, particularly in this political environment. We can't expect the changes to happen necessarily at a political level, but if we have those options, the availability of different options, whether it's better testing, it's a vaccine that comes sooner, some sort of tracking mechanism, and those are available in a toolkit that can be used by smaller groups, whether it's a school system or a company or whatever, that can open things up. I mean, one of the really remarkable things about this outbreak is just how responsive it is to behavior without mandates. And we've seen that certainly at UT as we've watched what's happened in the outbreaks on campuses. They've kind of dissipated and gone away. And so more of those tools, I think, is going to be really critical to getting through this and preparing for the next one. So pleasure to be here, and I'll get out of the way too. Look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Johnston. Dr. Chibi, you are joining us from the opposite side of the world. It's late in the afternoon for you already. What is it? Tell us a little bit about your work with the World Health Organization and how this pandemic is really manifesting in your communities and with the organizations you're working with.
Thank you very much, Verena. And yes, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to those who are listening from wherever they are. It actually gives me a great pleasure to be part of this panel, and most importantly, of course, to participate in this meeting that I think WHO has also benefited, or it has been used as a pilot to gauge the effectiveness of such a consortium. Why am I saying so? Just to give you the context of my work, I lead the work on innovation at WHO in the African region, with a specific focus on supporting countries to create sustainable demand for innovations, as well as creating a conducive ecosystem space for uptake of these innovations. So just a highlight, sometime end of 2018, we launched what we call the Innovation Challenge as a way of trying to gauge the capacity for innovation on the African continent. And we received thousands of innovations, more than 2,500 innovations that we needed to evaluate. And we didn't have that kind of capacity to really provide quality evaluation. And guess what? We leveraged the Austin community and Pandemic Tech, and also Lisa. They were really the engine behind, and they leveraged the Austin community to evaluate some of the submissions that we provided them. So basically, this is to illustrate the kind of importance to strategic partnership to advance certain strategic initiative, and we are very much grateful. And as I was coming to this panel discussion, and Dr. Moeti, who is the regional director, even told me that just to say thank you to the Austin community for that wonderful work. And we are really grateful as WHO. So this is just to confirm that this consortium is timely. And what we are also seeing here in WHO, we have spearheaded a number of innovative initiatives as a way of encouraging development of what we normally term as homegrown innovation. We organized what we call a hackathon, leveraging on the innovators on the continent, more than 100 of them. We bring them together. We challenge them with questions that they should solve, which are related to COVID-19. And also just to highlight that Pandemic Tech and Dr. Lisa McDonald were also part of the reviewing. So we have gone a long way in this kind of pattern. So I feel more qualified to be part of the Austin community and also to be part of this consortium because I feel we have benefited as WHO a lot from this. So I think I have a lot to say, but let me also just give the chance to other panelists to say something. Over to you.
We certainly love having you, Dr. Chibi, and the WHO as part of the Austin community and as part of TEXGHS. Welcome to all of you. You have all already kind of touched on something I want to dive deeper into, and that is, you know, when you're looking at collaborations and how some of the pressing current pandemic issues are affecting your communities, but how has collaboration from the community really made a difference? I actually, all three of you have kind of touched on it, but I'd love to hear some specific examples that very much impressed you when you put collaborations together, people came forth and wanted to help out the community. Dr. Johnston, do you want to get us kicked off?
Yeah, I mean, sure, I'd be happy to. I was thinking about what we've done well and what I don't feel so great about, and mostly in the issue of inequities, I don't feel great about. I mean, I think we knew that they were going to all be here, and we just sort of watched them cascade out, seemingly without control. But the one area that we did concentrate on was the homeless, because we recognized that was a very vulnerable population. And so we set up, in there too, we didn't wait for state funding or federal funding. We actually went out and got philanthropy so that we could just control it. And then we brought in the partners. So, we brought in the city, Community Care, which is our federally qualified health center network, and Central Health, the safety net system here locally. And that whole group worked together and created a plan to do extensive testing and tracing, and then also setting up places for people to live that were at risk or been exposed or COVID positive. And actually, we've done an amazing job of controlling the outbreak in the homeless population. I mean, it's hard to get comparative data, but we just haven't had. I mean, the rates of positivity in our homeless have been lower than in the background rates in much of the city. So that really worked, and it worked through collaboration. But again, a lot of what we were able to do was work around the dysfunction of the system that had been set up in advance. It really, again, it was more that entrepreneurial stuff and just working it out and bringing the right partners in, all who care about that outcome.
That's wonderful. Dr. Chibi, I know you've had quite a number of experiences in your communities as well. Would you mind talking a little bit about that to us?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think one thing that I need to emphasize is a community cannot just appear from nowhere. You need to build that community. And like I told you, our innovation journey actually started sometime way back in 2018. And over that time, we've been engaging in a number of activities with the innovation community. So when COVID-19 struck, we're very much in a better position to leverage the community that we had already strengthened through other means. And like I told you, one of the immediate steps that we took was to bring together the innovation community from the continent and organized a hackathon where we provided certain challenging areas where we thought and where we saw that we were actually struggling with when it comes to COVID-19 response. Just to put it in perspective, you can imagine some of the public health measures that were recommended. We talk of wearing of masks, social distancing, some of those, or even sanitizing, observing some of the hygienic measures. Some of those, or if not all of them, they are impractical. They're practically not possible in certain settings, especially from the African continent. Social distancing, how can you social distance when you live in one room, 10 of you? It's not possible. So what we thought we could do is, now if we reflect on our peculiarities in terms of challenges that COVID-19 has exposed us to, what are the innovative measures that we can challenge our innovation community to really address? And lo and behold, we're very much surprised on some of those innovations that that came out. And I can give you one example, which is an integrated platform that was developed by a team whose leader was from Uganda, and that innovation is being used at one of the biggest hospitals in that country. So we do have a number of innovations that actually emerged from this hackathon that are being piloted. As WHO, we provided seed funding, and we are monitoring progress on some of those innovations. So the other thing that I can also mention is the fact that there are some well-established companies on the continent, knowing that WHO has set up a functional innovation office. We received so many proposals, and what we did was to organize a seminar to allow these companies to pitch their ideas and also to share some of those business ideas to the whole continent. And we saw that there was so much uptake of some of these innovations in other regions, in other countries. So we basically leveraged what we had already built on. So with respect to this consortium, take time to build. You may not realize the results now, but certainly when you are persistent and consistent, and also putting in place certain strategic approaches, you will definitely reap or have return on investment, especially through the lenses of impact. I think this is what I can say for now.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Chibi. Representative Howard, how does it look at across the state of Texas when it comes to leveraging existing networks for collaborations to combat some of the issues?
Well, let me just say that we do have a lot of challenges, obviously, at the state level. We have gone from having a $3 billion surplus when we left last session with our 2-year budget to now having a revised estimate of a $4.6 billion shortfall. So at the same time that we're hearing like from Dr. Johnston that, we have not been investing in the infrastructure necessary to address a pandemic, we're finding ourselves with less resources immediately available. That doesn't mean we can't get to work and find those resources, and we happen to have some cushions in the state budget, luckily, but we must not back off from those investments. We've got to move forward and stay focused on what we're doing in higher education in particular, with the research, with these partnerships that are going on, with retraining and educating our workforce. We've had huge problems, of course, with people losing their jobs. And the latest report that just came out from the Bureau of Labor Statistics indicates that we are doing better now. But again, looking at the disproportionate impact, who's not doing better are Black Americans and Hispanic Americans. The COVID disease itself affects them disproportionately. They're disproportionately impacted by what's going on with the economy. These are all things that state government is going to have to be paying attention to. Huge issues with our IT infrastructure, which was part of the problem with having this continuing error-driven data system that nobody could count on. We've got to invest in that. So whatever we can do to work with the community, for instance, here in Austin, you know, extremely impressed with what happened with the UT consortium, the Myers Lab, that has provided information by collaborating with the computing center, with Dell Medical, with several others, and coming up with a model that local government leaders can look to say, this is really what's happening on the ground here. We can count on this data to know that this is something that we can hang our hats on if we're going to talk about reopening businesses and doing it safely. We reached out very early to Lisa McDonald and others, and they were already doing things. They didn't need us to step in, but luckily with the Austin Chamber too, coming together with a task force of way over 100 folks from the community representing the innovation community, government, health, academia, saying, how can we all work together to look at how we best move forward? So, you know, on a micro level, we see that that works. Austin is doing very well thanks to these collaborations.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Representative Howard. And I know we're getting towards the end of the panel, but there is one thing I would love to ask all of you. We have a number of innovators on this call today. And if you could just voice one vexing problem as we are going forward into this pandemic or preparing for the next one vexing problem that you wish you had a solution for, inspire our innovators and get them to do what they do best. Dr. Chibi, do you want to take us first?
Definitely. Thank you very much, Verena. As you were asking this question, I was actually smiling because that's what I do best. And I organize hackathons, I organize challenges, because what I really want is to inspire young people to think. And this is what I actually enjoy. So from the African perspective, what we have realized that, yes, it's a global pandemic, for instance, COVID-19, but it affects countries or regions differently. Mm-hmm. And what we have noticed, like I said, some of the public health measures that we encourage the communities to adhere to, they are not practical in certain settings. So I was saying, in a crowded place, how can you ensure that there is low transmission, but people can still go on doing their job because it's a matter of life or death? Can you come up with some sort of a wristband which should vibrate in your hand when you get closer to somebody who is COVID-19 positive? I don't know. I'm just thinking. But what I'm feeling is we are punishing people, or the way we are addressing this, we are punishing especially the poorest because we want to contain this virus. And people are actually dying as a result, not because of COVID-19 infection, but as a result of COVID-19. So how can you balance the two, and how can you really come up with contextual solutions that can address some of the peculiarities, especially that African people are facing?
Challenge heard, challenge accepted. Representative Howard, what's the vexing problem you would love our innovators to address?
It's so hard to narrow it down to one. I would say one of the first things, though, would be the disproportionality and the disproportionate impacts, disparities. How do we get a handle around that? But because I'm limited to one, I'm going to go off of Dr. Hotez and say the anti-science movement and how that has prohibited us from moving forward for many years. The legislature here in Texas has been very responsive to this very vocal minority group and has been unwilling to move forward with even such things as having a more robust registry system, which we know is critical in a pandemic. So I hope this group is going to listen to Dr. Hotez's advice here and help us refute the anti-science movement, which is getting in the way of us having effective responses here policy-wise. And this is going to continue. It's definitely an issue here in Texas. So I'll just be a politician for a minute and say elections matter, and we want to hear from you. We want your voice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative Howard. Dr. Johnston.
All right, so I'm going to do three, but they're going to be all real quick. First, a way to get teenagers out of bed to school. So that was me that you heard in the background, chastising my 15-year-old. And Alexa works quite well for this, but isn't perfect. You can drop in on the room. So the second is we need a platform to more rapidly develop testing in the future. A lot of churn on testing, a lot of inaccurate testing. For the vaccines, we've clearly created a platform to rapidly develop vaccines. We don't have that for testing. And then the third, this is to pick up on something that Representative Howard has mentioned a couple of times. We need a background system for IT to collect information about health outside of hospitals and clinics. It could be used in an epidemic, but also used in inequities. Right now, that data just isn't connected unless you buy it from Google or whatever, and everybody's suspicious of it. We need to sort of say, for public health reasons, that data is important, needs to get integrated. That has a use even between pandemics in terms of how we start to care for populations. So those would be my three.
Very good, Dr. Johnson. I think, so innovators, you heard our panelists today. Go solve some additional challenges. I know we're all busy right now, but I think all three mentioned some really important issues. With that, panelists, Dr. Chibi, Dr. Johnston, Representative Howard, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Greatly appreciate you sharing your insights. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day too.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you all, Dr. Kalhoff and panelists. We really appreciate you giving us feedback on what's been happening in our communities and some of the challenges, and hope that our innovators on the call will take up that challenge and work, use their minds to think and collaborate with others. I think we've seen today that collaboration is so important on a local level and an international level to really inspire change and to help with global health security and improve the security of our health as individuals, as a region in Texas, and as a nation and a society as a whole globally. So we thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you will consider partnering with us at TEXGHS as innovation innovators, ecosystem partners, or sponsors to support the work that we're doing. Please visit us at texghs.org to find out more and to sign up. And if you've registered for the webinar, we're going to be sending you a follow-up email with additional info on how to best get involved with TEXGHS, as well as a link to the recording of today's event. So again, we encourage you to visit us at texghs.org, reach out to us, go vote, make your voice heard, and move forward, hopefully, and become part of the solution. We thank you so much for your time today, and this concludes our event. Thank you.